Hey everybody, Zachary Mars here, founder of Finn's Fables, and this is my presentation for the University Advancing Technologies, Class MS649, Technology Forecasting and Change Management. And my presentation is called How AdHoc Studio Uses Unreal Engine Technologies, Blueprints, Sequencer, and Insights, and the future of these technologies. To give a little background, AdHoc Studio is a AA game company in the narrative-driven video game space, or an AA video game company. In a highly saturated video game market, by highly saturated, I mean there are the market size is about $300 billion, and there are over 3 billion gamers worldwide. There are countless video games made every year, both free and for profit. And within that space, Unreal Engine occupies sort of the greatest market share of actually sold games. Unity game engine has the most games made, but the most sold games actually belongs to Unreal Engine. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that technology and a little bit about AdHoc Studio. AdHoc Studio exploded onto the gaming scene with their flagship game Dispatch, a superhero workplace comedy. AdHoc Studios comprise of industry veterans from key narrative-driven game companies like Telltale Games and Ubisoft. Their customers base is comprised mostly of highly engaged story-focused gamers who like kind of choose-your-own-adventure games, especially fans of these Telltale adventure games. Who enjoyed games like the Walking Dead Telltale game series or The Wolf Among Us, very story-driven games, and games where your choices really matter, where you see completely different series of events based off of pivotal moments you make during the story. And then also Critical Role fans, people who like the Dungeons and Dragons streaming series that led to the creation of the Legend of the Vox Machina and sort of this whole fantasy universe. They collaborated with AdHoc Studio to voice a lot of the characters. Shroud, the villain of the game, is voiced by Matt Mercer, one of the kind of the DM and the head honcho over at Critical Role. So fans of this universe kind of became like a pre-built-in fan base. This crossover really helped build this early development excitement over Dispatch. Another big part of their fan base is streamers and influencers. That sort of helped drive, again, that excitement early on, is by getting big streamers to help promote the game. They were able to get a lot of people really excited. And one thing interesting that the developers also said is that they felt that influencers and streamers were sort of an untapped talent pool for voice acting. So these D&D streamers, the people at Critical Role, kind of almost went about it the opposite way, where they were voice actors and they wanted to take their voice acting and passion for Dungeons and Dragons and kind of make that into a streaming content show. But people at AdHoc think if we could do it the other way around, we could find streamers who already do streaming content of other types and kind of bring them into the acting realm to voice characters. And I agree. I think that's a great strategy. And the studios also, besides Dispatch, they're working on a sequel to the Dispatch game series. And they're working on developing a game in Critical Role's fantasy universe, the same universe as the Legend of the Ex Machina and a lot of the D&D games that they played. Well, I guess it's kind of inaccurate to call it D&D at this point because they've made their own Daggerheart role-playing system, among other things that they use, but kind of starting with Dungeons & Dragons and those tabletop role-playing games. So a little bit more about the video game Dispatch. Dispatch, when it released, sold 1 million copies in just 10 days. And reached their 3-year sale goal in just 3 months. To date, the game has sold over 4 million copies. It tells the story of Robert Robertson, played by Aaron Paul, famous for playing Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad. Anyway, he plays Robert Robertson, a legacy hero named Mecha Man, who inherited the superhero job and mech suit from his father, who in turn inherited it from his father. After suffering a crippling defeat at the hands of Shroud, a super intelligent evil mastermind, as I mentioned, played by Matthew Mercer, the Mecha Man suit is left out of commission, and Robert is left without a job. Enter Blonde Blazer, a Wonder Woman-esque hero who recruits Robert to work as a dispatcher for the Z-Team, an initiative to reform ex-supervillains and have them enter public service as superheroes. The game is full of unique character choices, romance, and epic quick-time action sequences. AdHoc Studio used a unique episodic release format to give the game a Sunday cartoon vibe, and the sort of anticipation fans get for waiting for like a new episode of their favorite cartoon show or anime even. Yeah, and the recipe was a smash success. Gamers ate it up. It sold right away. I know I played it when it first came out. I was super excited about it. The voice acting and the character work obviously is just stellar. The level of freedom of how you play the game and how your choices go through the game is incredible. You can literally kind of like watch the game play out itself and make no choices, and that's like almost just like watch it and it'll play itself and kind of do all these really cool things. And then you can also make unique character choices and see cool unique outcomes based on how quickly you react and how you play the different scenarios in the game. Even how you play different mini games in the game will affect how the characters interact later on. So they've got these really cool character interactions and this really high quality what they call the Western anime style. So they created this sort of cel shady cartoony look, hand painted backgrounds, and just made this really cool thing. They sort of took the Telltale format of video games and escalated it to almost like what if we had kind of more like Bandersnatch, where it was like an interactive TV show where it looked more like a TV show than these video games. And the recipe paid off. I mean, this game really puts these narrative-driven games into a whole nother level of player expectation. The level of marketing and success for a AA game company that is publishing the game itself is incredible. Even considering the fact that the game studio is made up of industry veterans, is their accomplishment is just amazing. And the fact that we might be seeing, probably it looks like we are seeing season 2 of this game and a Critical Role universe game as well with these sort of features and probably more expanding features is really exciting. So, how did AdHoc Studios use Unreal Engine to make Dispatch, and how are they using it now? That's sort of what this report's going to dive into, a deep analysis of, is how AdHoc Studio took advantage of specifically 3 technologies within Unreal Engine. We'll dive more into that here in a second, but let's just go over the slide. The studio's co-founder and creative director of Dispatch, Nick Herman, denounced the use of generative AI. So that's an interesting thing, is this company is outspoken. They don't believe generative AI belongs in video games. They don't believe it belongs in the process. It's a strong position against generative AI, and this is one that definitely appeals to the narrative-driven audience and the D&D audience. A lot of us are artists. A lot of us are creatives. So creatives have a problem with technology that can be seen as plagiarism. It steals a lot from other people's works. It's derivative. So, without further ado, Nick Herman said that AI feels like a production solution, not a creative one. Maybe it's a creative one if you aren't creative. So, kind of a dig. Like, if you want to use generative AI to make art, maybe you're not an artist, you know? Co-founder Michael Chung agrees, stating that what AdHoc makes, quote, has got to be made by people. AdHoc Studio developers use Unreal Engine blueprints to quickly develop and prototype features for the game using node-based graphs. That's the blueprints feature system, and we'll go over that in more detail in just a little bit. But a lot of the in-game mini-games and features and how they did scenes, they used blueprints to set up new game features and mechanics. For pre-visualization of complex animated scenes, the team took advantage of Unreal Engine UE's Sequencer. Sequencer is sort of an animation and production suite for making in-game cinematics and interactive video content. While they didn't use it to make a lot of the scenes, just the quality and everything that went into it, they used out-of-house animation and brought offline animation into their video database. So they used the Unreal Engine game features, and they used the sequencer animation features, the second technology I'm going to go over for pre-visualization. It's called previs, but that's sort of setting up like blocking for the scene and how the characters will move throughout the scene and how different scenes will kind of connect to each other, staging and stuff like that, done in a lot more simplified way, and we'll see more of that later on too. And finally, developing complex interactive scenes and cutscenes like this isn't an easy feat by any means. They sort of did a new thing with the technology, kind of dancing this line between video game and TV show. And so bugs and resources can easily come up in a thing like that. bottlenecks and performance issues. So AdHoc Studios took advantage of Unreal Insights to isolate and address bugs and performance bottlenecks. So here's our table of contents, and this gives a brief summary of what each of the technologies that we're going to be reviewing are, and a little bit about them. So first, we're going to go over Blueprints. It's Unreal Engine's visual scripting system. It uses a node-based flowchart interface to make creating game features and code easy. Many studios like AdHoc Studio use Blueprints along with C++ code customization, which is the underlying programming language in Unreal Engine for the versions up until 5. For productivity and code refinement. So you make features that are easy to make with the flowchart maker, but sometimes it's not the most efficient code. You can have an engineer come back in and edit the actual code to make it more efficient and scalable. It's not the most efficient system. It's something they're looking to kind of upgrade. In 6 is this, you don't have to worry about the code being as efficient underneath, things like that, things being more kind of serviceable and easy from a beginner in Unreal 6. But we'll go over into that later. That's Blueprints is like a visual flowchart programming system. I used it to make features in my own game, Sanguis Theorum. I did for the game project class here at UAT over 7.5 weeks, basically by myself. I set up a whole dialogue system, a quest system, combat system, magic, archery, all sorts of features really quickly using this Blueprint system because it makes setting up features really easy. So yeah, that's the main technology that we'll talk about. Is the first one is Blueprints. The second one is Sequencer. 2, Sequencer is a cinematics and an animation tool within Unreal Engine to create cutscenes, pre-visualization like the way AdHoc Studio used it, camera tracking, and nonlinear storytelling within the game. Perfect for this kind of branching story path, different animation sequences. Sequencer is a multi-track editor for creating and playing back cinematic sequences in real time. The newer features of Sequencers includes audio scrubbing, so you can scrub the timeline, see the animations play out, and hear how it syncs up with the audio all in real time. They also have subset tracks where different contributors can work on the same project and have their own sub-scenes of animations. So using Sequencer for setting up animations or even entire cutscenes, depending on how complex your video game is something that's really kind of widely picking up. It's this cool technology. It's not as widely adopted as Blueprints. Almost all, even AAA developers use Blueprints just for the simplicity of setting up and prototyping features. But it is starting to get widely used, especially more by the animation-heavy teams, and more indie teams are starting to look into that. And 3, the final category that we're doing for this presentation is Unreal Insights. It's a telemetry and performance analysis profiling suite within Unreal Engine. AdHoc Studio made good use of Unreal Engine Insights to keep complex features such as the multi-choice video playback manageable and bug-free. Again, those performance bottlenecks, analysis of how much video storage can they use, and what frame rate are they going to use using different features, things like that. Without knowing how performance is affecting and knowing what's going on, identifying and debugging these issues can be a lot more difficult. Insights is not quite as widely used or adopted as Blueprints as Sequencers. It's not as mature of a market, but it is a really, really cool tool that more developers can and will be starting to explore in the future, and AdHoc will likely and continue to use. Alrighty, so the first Unreal Engine technology that AdHoc uses that we're reviewing is going to be Unreal Engine Blueprints, the frontrunner in visual scripting systems for games. My first task was to create a dialogue system using Unity's then new visual scripting nodes. I built custom nodes to drive a key-mapped cardinal direction choice wheel that tied into the various scenarios of the game. Chris Hatch, Unity engineer for AdHoc Studio. You'll notice my reference there says 2022, so I don't think a lot of people necessarily knew that AdHoc Studio was using Unity for the earlier prototyping and pitching of the game, but this engineer who was recruited by the CTI of AdHoc Studio Well, they made a little blog post about how they prototyped some of the features using Unity's visual scripting things that use that. It was the same thing, a node-based visual scripting system, very much like Blueprints. But I just also wanted to address, first of all, that AdHoc used this other visual scripting system first, and eventually, obviously, phased it out in favor of Unreal Engine and Blueprints. For later prototyping, but also just that Unreal Engine was Epic was ahead of the curve on that one. Their Blueprint system was really popular and really far along in their market maturity and adoption by their users by the time that Unity started introducing these features. Nevertheless, Chris Hatch was able to prototype sort of that wheel of timing choices where you have so many times to make an option, and if you don't, it kind of just chooses the default option for you. Yeah, so that allowed this whole kind of multiple choice video playback feature that the game relies so heavily on to be prototyped quickly was with visual scripting within Unity, and AdHoc Studios quickly switched over after prototyping and pitching the game to developing using the visual scripting system Blueprints within within Unreal Engine 4. Blueprints are a huge part of our workflow, allowing programmers, designers, UI artists, and several other members of our team to collaborate in a powerful, meaningful way. Given our small team size, they enabled our developers outside the engineering department to prototype and create features that became core to our game's experience, like the shift and hacking mechanics. Dennis Leonard, CTO and creative director of AdHoc Studio. Dennis Leonard was the same person who recruited Chris Hatch as a Unity engineer to prototype some of those features early on. And here he was talking in an Epic Unreal Engine article about how they took advantage of Blueprint systems to prototype the hacking minigame and other minigames within Dispatch that became core features. So developing neat and new game features is easy with Blueprints. It's sort of the bread and butter of it. It's a very cool usage of it by AdHoc Studio to create these interactive features that kind of took the Telltale Games mechanics and elevated them to a level that used a higher level of video playback, a higher level of interaction, even more meaningful in depth to the narrative plot. Just really, really cool stuff. And they were able to do it quickly and get the project done in an unbelievably quick amount of time, considering the scope of the project, using these prototyping technologies, Blueprints. So to analyze it in terms of adoption curves, S-curves, and the Gartner hype cycle, we can say that Blueprints is in the late majority to laggards phase for game development. It's a very, very mature market. It's been extremely mature since 2014, so many, many years now, at least 12 years it's been a mature market. It's at the very late stage of that. Widespread use among professionals. Almost all people who use Unreal Engine use Blueprints to some extent. It's super convenient, super cool tool. Makes worrying about how to make a feature work less about worrying how the underlying code works and more about just the logic of the feature itself. It's the go-to technology for rapid prototyping and feature development for non-programmers, and like I said, almost every user takes advantage of this. So in terms of the S-curve, it's that very late into the S-curve. The Gartner hype cycle, in terms of the hype cycle, UE Blueprints is well into the plateau of productivity. It might be surprising to learn that even though it's super widely used, I mean, maybe not, because this is very late in maturity stage in the market. It's already looking to be phased out. It's not going to be phased out this year. By the end of next year, we'll start to see the early release of 2026. And that's when the developers plan to do away with Blueprints altogether in favor of their new proprietary programming language and system called Verse, which will have a new graphic level above it called Scene Graph. Sounds like it'll be a similar kind of flowcharty system, but more robust, more set up to serve other features like AI and more scalable live service online games. So their hope is that it'll make game features more ostensible, more like pack and ready to go. Like you can make a feature for one game and it would work readily in another game. It's the idea. There's a lot of advancements coming in the way, but that's not going to be quite mature for a couple of years. So we're saying very mature in terms of the S curve. It's at the very right of the adoption curve where we're starting to see kind of usage even drop off a little bit. But it's still not, it's kind of going to be a steep drop off because right now it's still in use because Unreal Engine 6 won't be out until early access until the the end of 2027. So we've got a little bit of time here before it's phased out. So, for recommendations for this technology, AdHoc Studio has made timely use of the technology, kind of coming in right when it has the most support. It's got the visual scripting system has a lot of popularity, so there's a lot of user tutorials, there's a lot of Epic game support. It's very market ready, very serviceable, smart thing to go with. And again, just at this point, it was well more mature than Unity's node-based visual scripting system. And actually, a little just before they started using it, Unity actually didn't even have a native one. They had a library that brought in an external extension to do it. Now they have it homebrewed just like Unreal Engine does. But anyway, at the time, certainly in 2022, 2023, 2024, when they were developing Dispatch, Blueprints was the go-to technology for visual scripting. It was a smart move to use it then. It's a smart move to keep using it for the sequel, for the upcoming sequel, and the Critical Role game set in the world of Exandria. They'll very likely continue to use Dispatch to prototype new features, especially for Exandria, the Exandria game, but also I'm sure for Dispatch as well. The sequel is going to have, I'm sure, some differentiating features. That's a big part of game development, is surprising your users, and the new thing can't be just like the old thing. They have fewer new systems to develop, though, and so the fully supported release of Unreal 6 won't be ready for a couple years. So the early release will be the end of 2007, probably end of 2008, maybe mid-2009. We'll see a full supported market-ready version of Unreal Engine 6 with Verse that will not have... it won't have blueprints. Unreal Engine 5 will still be a thing and still be used during that phase. But at that point, AdHoc should probably start looking into using the new systems in Verse and phasing out the use of blueprints. After finishing the Dispatch sequel and this Exandria game especially, they probably, within the next 2 years, they'll probably be done with those games, complete them out using Unreal Engine 5 and Dispatch, Unreal Engine 5 and Blueprints for Dispatch the sequel and for the Critical Role video game. Afterwards, it's like I said, it's fully advisable that they completely phase out using blueprints in Unreal Engine 5. After 4 years, my advice is to cut Unreal Engine 5, out using the old systems and blueprints, and kind of accept the forward march of the technology that Verse and Scene Graph and Unreal Engine 6 are going to be what becomes widely used and what replaces it. And I would recommend becoming early adopters and sort of these innovators, this first stage of adopting Verse and Scene Graph. I think that's just a great way to get ahead of the curve and start getting used to the technology, even though it's not supported, just to beat out the competition and how it's used, especially for developing these innovative kind of features that kind of escalate the level of visual quality and production and interactivity of the game. But so that's my recommendations for blueprints. Keep using it for now. Keep using it for the next couple of years. Year 3, 4, start looking to switch over to the replacement technology. The second technology I wanted to go over was Unreal Engine Sequencer, a multi-track editor for creating game cinematics and an animation production hub. While we developed Dispatch in Unreal 4.27, we have been using the latest versions of Unreal Engine 5 all along the way in a separate project to use for pre-visualization. Sequencer, control rig, and animation tools in Unreal Engine 5 are all fantastic, and although we weren't actually shipping any of that content, it did help us to block out important moments in the game that we could use as reference for our animation team downstream. Leonard, 2026. Dennis Leonard, the CTO and creative director of AdHoc Studios. This is another quote from that same article talking about blueprints, but also a little bit more about how they used Sequencer. Again, focusing on the pre-visualization stage. It's that early blocking out. None of the features will be like really that detailed or developed, because again, they're mostly using it to go, well, this is how it's going to look on the game screen to block it out for animators. So when they have the actual animation team use the out-of-house animation software, they have like a good frame of reference for how to set up the blocking and the staging and the scene themselves, so they don't have to start from scratch in terms of getting the animating going. It's a great way. It's kind of like in level design, you'll do this what's called gray boxing, where you set up basic shapes for the level before you put in any scene decorations or colors or anything. And maybe just color code the scene, but that would be it. You don't add any like shrubs or trees or pretty stuff. It's you start with the core mechanics of what's needed for the blocking, basic shapes for the people and things like that, and you set up the staging of the scene. And that way you can see what works ahead of time before you spend a bunch of money on expensive animations and the really hand-painted backgrounds and making everything look a certain way. You do the staging and the gray boxing, so it's easy to make changes, easy to make fixes to like the camera angle and things like that when you haven't put a lot of resources in, and then when everything looks great, you commit to it, then you do the developed full product. So this pre-visualization, or previs as it's commonly called in the business, is the big way that the AdHoc Studio takes advantage of Sequencer. So yeah, this here is actually, this is not from Unreal Engine Sequencer, but this just is to give you a visualization. This is actually from Chris Hatch's work in Unity on the feature I was talking about on this little dialogue wheel system where you can choose different video segments and get different outcomes in the game. But it just to show you what a pre-visualization scene typically looks like. It'll have maybe some kind of basic game layouts and the UI and stuff. It'll have basic shapes and blockings. You see what the scene is. You can see what's going on. But it's not something that took a ton of work. The characters aren't fully detailed. There's not textures or anything. It's just to give you an idea of the layout and the look of the scene, the staging, the blocking, things like that. Yeah, and then this just give you an idea of what that would look like in Unreal Engine for AdHoc Studio, especially for Dispatch, because this is from Dispatch. I think this is arguably a previs scene. It's just one that was made in Unity instead of Unreal Engine before they transferred. Sequencer is a maturing technology. So I said that Blueprints is a mature technology on my other slide. This one's a maturing. It's not quite at the edge of that adoption curve and S-curve and hype cycle. It's getting towards that late adopters, but not quite the laggard stage. Like Blueprints, it's more or less an industry standard for in-game cinematic production. For big game studios and small game studios, indie solo game developers, anyone who wants to kind of get more animation heavy and make cinematics in 3D especially, they're going to be using Sequencer. Even 2D, but yeah, for animation and cutscenes. It's not quite as universal as Blueprints. Almost all developers use Blueprints to some extent. Nonetheless, it's a mature market. It's widely supported. It's been around for years. On the technology adoption curve, Sequencer has moved from the early adopter phase to the early majority phase, maybe even kind of getting toward the late majority phase. It's definitely officially crossed the chasm on the technology adoption curve. It's a market-ready, market-supported technology in the S-curve. It's in the steep part of the S, reaching the maturity point in the innovation window. In the Gartner hype cycle, I would say that innovations are still likely. However, the technology is definitely in the plateau of productivity, not quite at the edge of the plateau of productivity where it's about to be replaced. It's the late rapid growth. Over the next 2 years, it'll continue to advance, actually, probably see more and more usage in Unreal Engine 5 as use cases for the sequencer and the animation and cutscenes and things expand, especially in the indie scene. As optimizations occur, its relevance and evolution will sustain the technology through a continued but plateaued growth over the next 4 years. It's safe to say it's in the plateau of productivity, but not as far as long as Blueprints. Also, in Unreal Engine 6, Epic has been clear they are getting rid of Blueprints. There hasn't been any official say as to what's going to happen with Sequencer or Unreal Insights, but it is my guesstimate, my professional opinion, that they will likely stay and probably remain under the same name just for simplicity, for ease of usage. These technologies are still relevant even under the new verse programming language. I mean, so that's something that will need to be addressed, is Sequencer will need to be updated to work with this new programming framework and the new scene graph way of doing things. But it will likely, unlike Blueprints, which is being replaced by scene graph, it will have a future in Unreal Engine 6. So over the next 4 years, even though it's a maturing technology, I do not think it's likely to be replaced. And that brings me to my recommendations for the technology. So, although it's nearing maturity, it's not likely to deteriorate. It's not going to go away. It's not going to stop being used in Unreal Engine 5, and it's not going to be stopped being used in Unreal Engine 6. Developers will still need to set up pre-visualization for scenes, even setting up full animations and cutscenes, kind of sequential animated things. It's a great way to work collaboratively. It's got some great technologies. It just makes animation within the actual Unreal game engine a lot more feasible and production ready. Epic has not made any official announcement regarding Sequencer, as I said, in Unreal Engine 6, which is slated for early access release near the end of 2027. However, as I said, it's likely Sequencer will continue to play a role. AdHoc's usage of Sequencer to do previs and animated sequences, especially the pre-visualization, set out the blocking for the animators out of house, which are then developed out of game engines. It's entirely appropriate. It's one of the main use cases for Sequencer. So it's a smart move that AdHoc did this. They will almost definitely continue to do this in Dispatch 2, or the sequel to Dispatch, the next generation, whatever it's going to be called, as well as the Exandria Critical Role game. They will probably continue to do pre-visualization and setup and block scenes. It's just, again, a great way to save money, a great way to technologically save productivity time by setting up the scene in a simpler blocking fashion. It's really for setting up camera and lighting and blocking, things like that, without getting into the nitty-gritty of it. Like I said, going into a full lighting or going into a full animated scene that could take a lot of money, and then if it doesn't work, you have to redo the whole thing. It's just that the first kind of starting stage of the animation production cycle. So yeah, great use cases. The company should keep an eye out for how Sequencer is going to change in Unreal 6, especially looking towards years 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 especially. It may change with the verse coding language and the full release of Unreal Engine 6 in 2028 or 2029. By year 4, animation may look differently. We might start seeing like the way that verse and scene graph replaced blueprints. By year 4, we may see something on the horizon for Unreal Engine, or even on Unity if it becomes more popular for commercial games, that we'll start seeing a technology that kind of passes Sequencer, or does Sequencer differently or better, or who knows. Animation may look very different at that time. So year 4, we'll start looking into changes in technologies, but I would say AdHoc would and should continue to use Sequencer within Unreal Engine 5 and 6 for the next 4 years. The final technology I want to talk about, Unreal technology that AdHoc Studio uses, is called Unreal Insights. It's a telemetry and performance analysis profiling suite. So telemetry is sort of measuring what keys, what inputs were put into a game, and sort of how the system responds to that. That's the performance analysis. But yeah, it's a way to stress test and test the inputs and outputs of your game, how things work, what changes, performance bottlenecks, if your frame rate's being run down by a bunch of game mechanics and features. This is how you debug it, break it down, find out what's going on. It's a really cool feature, considering how useful it is, especially for more complex animations and scenes. I think it's kind of surprisingly underutilized. It's a little bit earlier in the market, and we'll go a little bit more into AdHoc's usage of it and the technology here. Unreal Insights has been invaluable, not only for profiling our game's resource usage, but also when diagnosing timing-related bugs across multiple systems. Without having this big picture view of the activity for things like the file input-output, asset loading, rendering, and the task graph, it would have been much more difficult to isolate certain categories of bugs. Being able to annotate a capture with logs and custom bookmarks is very powerful as well. The in-engine real-time stats are very flexible and easy to extend with custom metrics, and we made good use of those as a first line of defense against expensive rendering passes, slow blueprint tick functions, texture memory consumption, and other performance concerns. Seth Kingsley, lead programmer at AdHoc Studio. Yeah, so he was interviewed by Epic Games, and he gave this lead programmer kind of gave a breakdown of sort of how they use Unreal Insights to do input output analysis, do processing analysis. They talked about those blueprint tick functions. So every tick of the game's internal engine clock, every loop, it may take a certain amount of time. And if things take too much processing within a blueprint, within a game feature, like that video playback feature, which is really cool, kind of the central feature that makes this really cool animation work in a way that is branching, in a way that actually allows you to have this freedom of choice, so this freedom of adventure. It allows them to quickly stress test features like that, find performance issues, and all while working together, they can find, okay, well, why would it work differently on this kind of system? Or, why is it taking so long to render this particular scene? Things like that. So it's a really cool suite that allows you kind of to debug, and not just debug the actual code or issues or errors, but so much as like resource issues, the issues that shows that you're using too much processing power, or you're using the graphics card too much, or it's taking too long, and so it's not feasible to keep up with the frame rate of the game to make the game fun and enjoyable. Performance issues, I can tell you, are a huge concern for game developers. They always have been. Even as games get more advanced and computers get more advanced, there's still this need, especially for live service and scalable games, to have a sort of way to maintain and track and fix issues that cause wasteful resource usage, that cause time delays on your system, that cause rendering delays. All of these things are things that can severely impact gameplay and take a really fun game and just make it not that. So really important stuff. The telemetry, measuring how the input output affects the game and the resources, and being able to address those issues and identify them and isolate them and fix them. The number one optimization mistake is guessing where the problem is. Developers spend hours rewriting systems they think are slow, only to discover the actual bottleneck was somewhere else entirely. Profiling turns optimization from guesswork into science. You measure, identify the real bottleneck, fix it, measure again. Repeat until you hit your target frame rate. This is a quote from the Stray Spark Game Studios blog, talking about how you can use Unreal Insights in your own game to, again, identify bottlenecks. Like they said, the worst thing you can do when trying to fix a performance issue in your game is just guess and throw things at it. It's just an inefficient way of doing things. Like we talked about, the pre-visualization is a way to save time and resources in making animation scenes that work and look better. Well, Unreal Insights is a great way to save time and resources in the debugging process, take away the guesswork, make it a scientific and aimed approach that you can measure and fix and repeat, study and test and study and test until your game runs smoothly, until your features work like a charm. It's super useful. AdHoc Studio made good use of Unreal Engine Insights to keep complex interactive animated features manageable and bug-free. This technology is easier in each of the cycles. Is earlier in each of the cycles, and by that I mean it's earlier in the Gartner hype cycle, it's earlier in the technology adoption curve, it's earlier in the S curve. It's in the early majority phase of the technology curve, and the early adopter to early majority phase of the technology adoption curve. It's very useful for optimizing complex projects, but it's not quite as universally used. Again, I think kind of surprisingly so, maybe because this is kind of a more complex debugging thing. This is like if you're using cutting edge shading and you're using a lot of resources within your game. I mean, maybe if you're just being wasteful, but the thing is, if you are using this tool, you at least have an eye on optimization. So it takes a little bit more technological fine point to even be addressing resource issues. So that's probably why it's it's a little bit later in the adoption phase. It's a little bit not as wide of a user base as Sequencer, and certainly not as wide as Blueprints. On the S curve, Unreal Insights is in the middle to late rapid growth phase, but not quite as close to maturing as Sequencer is. on the Gartner hype cycle. It is on the slope of enlightenment. It's not quite to the plateau of productivity, probably a couple of years out from that. Expectations are realistic. There's no more bubble or hype around it. That bubble's kind of burst, and we're back into the realistic phase. This is very usable. It totally helped them create the system more efficiently and release a game that worked really well. With the game and virtual production markets growing, this technology is likely to mature and become widely adopted over the next 2 to 4 years. So, likely to see growth. Again, recommendations for this technology in particular, keep using it. AdHoc Studios should definitely keep using it. They will likely keep using it. Again, with Unreal Engine 6 over the corner, Unreal Insights, this telemetry suite, it'll have to change to work with the underlying verse programming language. So it won't be working with C++ anymore, but they will definitely have Unreal Insights or some form of in-house telemetry suites. I will willing to bet it's basically going to be a reformed version of Unreal Insights for verse in Unreal Engine 6. So it's still being developed. It's probably going to be in the majority phase by the last 4 years, but right now it's still in that early majority phase. And so here, now that I've kind of given my recommendations for each technology, I kind of wanted to look at them on each of the 3 charts sort of comparatively, so we can kind of just look at that, and then I'll go over the whole timeline for the 4 years in the technology. So here we have a diagram called Crossing the Chasm that shows that technology adoption curve, that sort of normal distribution curve of technology. You can see in the innovators phase, that verse programming language and the scene graph, Unreal Engine 6, it's not even in the innovators phase. It's not an early release, but here by the end of 2027, in the year and a half, it will be released into that innovators phase. The first people will start using it. And it's my recommendation that when it does release at the end of 2007, 2008, and especially the full release in 2008, 2009, that AdHoc should start adopting it and learning it and phasing out blueprints in favor of the new system. Here we can see that if the early majority, past the chasm, is each of the technologies I reviewed today, Unreal Engine, Blueprints, Sequencer, and Insights, are past the chasm. So they're in the mainstream market. These are basically maturing markets. I would say Unreal Engine Insights is definitely in the early majority phase, still kind of catching on. Sequencer is getting to that late majority phase, but still probably early majority phase. And Blueprints is all the way in the laggards phase. It's been around, it's been mature. Usage is not, the drop off is probably not going to be as steep as in this version of the graph. Actually, it's probably going to take longer to plateau and have a steeper drop off at the end, because it's probably going to be used very widely right until the full release of Unreal Engine 6 in 2008. So it's phasing out, but it's going to be widely used until it's completely phased out. Now here we can see sort of a comparison of the S-curves over time. You can see that Blueprints has been around the longest, and it's already the most mature. It's kind of already phasing out. Insights is starting to grow and be widely used, but it's not being quite phased out yet. Sequencer is even further along than that, but it's not, it's not being phased out yet either. It's still being kind of, it's later in the development than Blueprints. And finally, that all the S-curve of this that's being developed, while it's not happening right now, it's going to be overlapped and superseded by the introduction of verse and scene graph in Unreal Engine 6, especially 2008 and onward. For the next few years, we're going to see verse and scene graph affect and change all these features. It's especially going to get rid of and phase out Blueprints altogether. That's why that's the smallest phased out beginning one there. That's going by. Insights and Sequencer are going to transform, and towards the end of the last 4 years, we may be seeing a new type of replacement for Sequencer. Right now, these will, and for the next 4 years, Blueprints, Insights, and Sequencers should continue to be used by AdHoc, and pretty widely throughout the rest of the gaming industry as well. And finally, in terms of the Gartner hype cycle, we can see that the innovation trigger has been hit for the verse programming language. There's this new demand for these more scalable systems, these AI systems, these live service systems, and sort of this expansion of what visual scripting and game development is going to look like in the future. So here we see the innovation's been triggered, but we're not quite to that peak of inflated expectation with the verse programming languages. People are excited, but the hype is still building. And it hasn't been disillusioned yet and debugged yet, and that's going to be 2008 and 2009. It's going to hit through that trough and move on. Anyway, right now it's still innovation trigger phase. The slope of enlightenment, I would say Unreal Engine Insights is still hitting that slope of enlightenment. People are starting to go, oh yeah, this is really useful. It's not quite widely, universally expanded. It's not the plateau of productivity like with Sequencer and Blueprints, where those technologies are mature, the market's mature, tons of people use them. If you haven't touched Unreal Engine or Sequencer, Blueprints or Sequencer, you haven't probably used Unreal Engine very much. And that being said, they're great technologies to use for the time being for AdHoc. They're going to continue to be good technologies for the next few years until Verse really kind of comes into its own. And without further ado, that brings us to our final timeline of how AdHoc Studios will use the technology. These three technologies over the next 4 years. So over the next year, from now until the end of 2027, we'll have Unreal Engine 5 as the dominant technology. Unreal Engine 6 is scheduled to early access release at the end of 2027. So all Blueprint, Sequencer, and Insight should be widely used at AdHoc. It's probably not going to change over for Dispatch's sequel or for the Exandria Critical Role game. None of that's going to likely be made in Unreal Engine 6 if I'm giving my professional estimate there. And recommendation, I would say keep using Unreal 5 to finish out those projects. But as that releases in 2027, I would have engineers starting to look into Verse and Scene Graph and start preparing for the adoption of that new technology, to start working at being innovators in that adoption phase, just to get ahead of the curve. So year 2 in 2028, 2027 to the end of 2028, we'll see probably the full release of Unreal Engine 6. It'll start to become more that those early majority people, not quite even early majority, that not crossing the chasm, but about to. Unreal Engine 5 is still an option to keep completing the AdHoc games. If Exandria game is still in development at that point, keep using it. But start having people look into more and more, especially with the full release and more support, have people learn and start looking at the next chapter of AdHoc Studios, maybe the third generation of games using Unreal Engine 6, Verse, and Scene Graph. Year 3, 2029, Verse and Unreal Engine 6 will start to be the norm. Bigger companies will start to adopt it. More and more indies will start to use it. At this point, we should pretty much have all of our engineers at AdHoc phase over. Well, all of their engineers, I should say, phase over to getting rid of Blueprints altogether, stopping use Unreal Engine 5, and transitioning over to Unreal Engine 6 and learning Scene Graph and Verse. I believe Sequence and Insights will be a key part for pre-visualization and keeping complex code under control, both in Unreal Engine 5 and on Unreal Engine 6 in that year. The Sequencer and Insights will likely change to work with the underlying Verse code, but I doubt they will be renamed, and they will probably fundamentally be the same technology, but with an underlying code difference. 2030, most developers will rely on Unreal Engine 6, and Unreal Engine 5 will be a legacy technology. Blueprints will be completely phased out. AdHoc should stop using them by 2030, and Sequencer may be seeing major changes or upgrades or even a possible replacement technology on the horizon. So that's the main thing AdHoc is we needs to start looking at looking into how to use Unreal Engine 6, Verse, and Scene Graph as soon as access is available, as soon as information is available. Get ahead of the curve on that and really start adopting that. It may not be as robust and supported as 5, but by year 4, it will have enough support that 5 and the features will start to be obsolete. And so as these technologies become obsolete, that's when it becomes time to move on towards year 4, years 1, 2, and 3, all the way up to 2009. I think it would be safe for AdHoc to keep using Unreal Engine 5, finish out their game projects, and again, if they're starting any new projects, that's when I would start looking into Unreal Engine 6. So thanks all for listening to my presentation. Here's all of my references. A lot of good articles here to check out. Stuff on how to use Sequencer, how to use insights in your own games. Articles from the developers and the founders of AdHoc Studio. A little bit by Stray Spark Game Studio on how to use performance profiling on Unreal Engine 5. All good stuff. Thanks for playing. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out Kintaro by Finn's Fables. I've got some free playtest stuff available up on my itch page. Just look up Kintaro and you'll find it. Keep an eye on these technologies. Whether you use Unity or Unreal Engine, it's good to be aware of the technologies and how to forecast them and predict what it's going to look like in the next few years, so you can be better prepared, better at setting the course ahead. Like I said, take the guesswork out of it and make it a science. So thanks again for listening. I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. Zach Mars out.